Good evening, everyone. Can anyone hear me now? Am I good now? Sorry, I have to remember both mics. This mic is for YouTube and for people at home wanting to tune in, and this mic is for all of us here. So welcome on this wintry eve. I trust everyone knows that they're in the right location. It's for the 214 Ontario Street development. This is an open house to learn of some of the most recent information on it, still in preliminary stages. A little bit cold out there, but I understand the weather is going to turn for the better next little while. So thanks for being here. I trust everyone also knows where all the washrooms are, just outside the door and down a bit. And you can see the exits are well marked as well. But I don't think that's an issue. And so we're just also mindful of the COVID protocols. Can't get away from that in the news. So it means being masked as we find our spaces and maintain that separation where we can, the 6 feet separation from persons not within our bubble. And to do this, capacity has been limited, but that hasn't been so much of an issue tonight, it seems. I just want to also let everyone know that Council has taken a strong interest in this as well. And that for tonight's open house, the mayor, members of council are tuning in via the live stream YouTube, and this allows for extra space for everybody else as well. And this is not a statutory public meeting under the Planning Act per se. The Planning Act does have some regulations encouraging a public engagement strategy. So the staff with Brighton have strongly encouraged this format of pre-application open house, get information out as soon and as early as possible, get that feedback back to the proponent of the development, and then armed with that information, they can shape the development content and the process. So that's what we're here about tonight. So as I indicated, the mayor and members of council are listening, and so they'll hear your questions, and any comments after tonight are encouraged to be documented on some comment forms that we have available. And if not, you can deliver those to us via email. Just in a written form, it really helps staff keep organized to make sure we don't miss some of the points that you've made, and gives us make sure that we can also then pass that on to the proponent and make sure that they've have everyone's comments and nothing has been missed that way. And ultimately, those comments will form part of a formal submission sometime in the future. So what are the proceedings like tonight? So a number of presentations are in queue. Mr. Barry is our manager of approvals, and he will be providing an overview of the planning development process and some indication of how planning decisions are made by the municipality of Brighton. And then following Mr. Barry's presentation, the development proponent, Mr. Paul Demzak of Battery Management, he will give an overview of the development project specific to the site of 214 Ontario Street, and looking at a few options. So we'll look forward to hearing that from Mr. Demzak. And then after that, there'll be an opportunity for people to ask questions. So we have a podium and a mic. And by speaking into the mic, then people at home can hear your questions and council can hear your questions. And then we'll have some wipes available as well. So keeping with COVID protocol, as you approach the podium and use the mic, and then use the wipes to make it appropriately clean for the next person coming up, so the next person feels comfortable following you and asking their questions. So we have 5 minutes available to each person, and we have a time limit of 2 hours tonight. And once you've had your 5 minutes, if you could just make time available for the following person, and then if we have time left at the end of the night, then you can have a chance to have another go at it if you feel that some of the comments or questions that you heard aren't representing your question or comments that you'd like to follow up with. So let's try not to, repeat too much of the content that's been covered by previous speakers. But if you feel there's something missing, then please, by all means, come forward and ask your questions or make your comments. So again, just pretty much touched on this, but the purpose of the meeting tonight is to provide everyone here with an opportunity to provide comments and ask questions, both of staff and of the proponent. And Josh, as I say, will provide an overview of the process going forward. And the actual formal application is yet to be submitted, and then it will, once it is, there'll be additional notices about to whether the application is complete or not, because there are certain contents that are required. And then, and only then does it get notified for a statutory public meeting of the Planning Act and gets before council in that light. So the proponents consulting team is working on a number of studies, because our official plan speaks directly to some and certain studies that need to be completed. And some of that is very site specific, so it's not like every study is necessarily the exact same study every time. It's very specific to the development proposal, and it's very specific to the site itself. So there has been some initial effort that way, but I want you to know that your comments will shape those studies that will be done. And then those studies will form part of that complete application. So I think at this point, Josh, if you're wanting to give an overview of the development review process and the process specific to the municipality of Brighton, then that would be great. Turn that off. You won't have to.
Thank you. Good evening. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you so much. So thank you for coming out this evening, first and foremost. It's always great to see people from the community engaged with the development review process. So as Paul has alluded to, I'm just going to give a brief overview of the development review process here in Brighton. So Sam, would you mind just going to the next slide? So the purpose of this presentation is to provide the public with an overview of the development review process. The staff will also identify the different stages that the public has an opportunity to participate in the review of the development proposal. So I've outlined 6 development stages here. There's the pre-consultation stage, which we are currently in right now, the submission of complete applications, a statutory public meeting at council, a review and comment by municipal staff and agencies, such as Lower Trent Conservation Authority, a revised submission to address those comments from departments, agencies, and the public, and then finally a council meeting for a decision. So what is the pre-consultation stage? The proponent is currently in this stage. The purpose of this stage is to confirm the requirements for a complete application, to receive initial comments on the development proposal from municipal staff and agency staff. The public has an opportunity to comment on the development review proposal through the submission of written comments and oral comments at the community open house, i.e. the virtual open house that was held a few weeks ago, and tonight's meeting. The pre-consultation helps inform the requirements for a complete application under the Planning Act. So staff have identified preliminary issues based on the previous open house and through a review of provincial and municipal policy. So I'll just go to the preliminary issues slide here. Impact on the natural environment, i.e. wetlands and floodplain constraints, the compatibility of the built form of adjacent properties, impacts of construction and development on adjacent properties, increased traffic as a result of development, privacy and screening from adjacent properties, and the municipal sanitary and municipal water servicing of the site. So as part of the Planning Act process, planning staff are directed through the Planning Act legislation in the municipality of Brighton official plan to request certain supporting studies and documents. So as part of this application, there's a planning justification report prepared by a registered professional planner. That will be Mr. Paul Bemchak and his team, an environmental impact study, a tree inventory and preservation plan, a preliminary landscape plan, a phase 1 and phase 2 environmental site assessment. This is related to the former greenhouse operation on the site, a functional servicing and stormwater management report, i.e. a servicing study to look at sanitary capacity, municipal water capacity, and how stormwater and drainage is dealt with on site, a traffic impact study, an archaeological assessment, a geotechnical investigation report, and site plans and building elevations. So the applicant will review and address the comments received at tonight's meeting as part of their complete application. The applicant will be submitting a zoning bylaw amendment, an official plan amendment application, and the required complete application information that I had just listed. A site plan control application is also required to deal with the detailed design of the site. Once the application has been deemed complete, a public meeting will be scheduled to provide the public and council with an opportunity to review and comment on the development. So a statutory public meeting is held once a complete application has been submitted. A notice of public meeting will be provided in accordance with the requirements of the Planning Act. The statutory public meeting is a council meeting that provides the public and members of the council an opportunity to comment on the application. Any member of the public can speak at the statutory public meeting. No decision will be made at the statutory public meeting. It is an opportunity to provide comments on the application in a more formalized setting. So as mentioned, once the complete application has been submitted to the municipality of Brighton will review and circulate it to internal departments and agencies for review. The Brighton official plan provides direction on the review of these applications, including compatibility, density, and building form. Lower Trent Conservation will review the environmental impact study and the engineering drawings to ensure there are no adverse impacts to the natural environment. Lower Trent Conservation will also review to ensure development is located outside of the hazard areas and required setbacks. A final submission will then eventually be made to council for a decision. The applicant will be required to address comments provided by municipal staff, agency staff, and the reviewers. The applicant will be required to provide a summary of how public comments have been addressed. A council meeting will be held to make a decision on the applications. A notice of decision will then be mailed to the applicant, agencies, and anyone who has requested written notification of the decision. So what are the opportunities for the public to participate? Of course, you can send comments at any time to planning@brighton.ca during the review process. You can attend the virtual community open house, which was held on November 10th. And there's this meeting tonight, the community open house at the arena. And then eventually a statutory public meeting will be scheduled once a complete application has been submitted. So that's just my brief overview of the application review process. I'll now turn it over to the proponents team to talk about the actual development options. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Yeah, thank you everyone for coming this evening. This is my first public open house meeting in person over a year and a half, so it's nice to see a good turnout tonight. So the subject property, as Josh and Paul mentioned, at 214 Ontario Street. The purposes of just at a high level, just of this meeting, we have not submitted, again, as it's been mentioned, we've not submitted any formal planning applications to the municipality. The purposes of tonight is essentially to provide an introduction to some development concept options, give a bit of history about where we are at, some of the background information that the consulting team has put together, and most importantly, to hear from all of you tonight on any comments, feedback that you may have this evening. So I'll just give a quick overview. So just in terms of its location, the site is located, oh, sorry, just, okay. Okay, great. That's okay, Josh. Okay, so thank you. So the subject site is just over 2 acres, or sorry, 2 hectares in size, with just over 100 meters of frontage on Ontario Street. As Josh mentioned, it was a former greenhouse operation on the property with ancillary vacant lands to the rear of the site. So my client, the applicant, is looking to develop the lands for residential purposes throughout the entirety of the property. Next slide, please. So just some high-level planning policy information. So the subject site is, this is within the County of Northumberland official plan. The subject site is located within the designated urban area. Just at a high level, urban areas are intended to see obviously the majority of growth from a development perspective by the province. And this is obviously downloaded at a county level in this case, and then subsequently at the local level with the municipality. So the subject site is within the urban area of Brighton, as noted in the County of Northumberland official plan. There is a requirement in the policies of the Northumberland official plan that speak to achieving density targets of 40 jobs and people on average per hectare. And obviously, any application that comes forward on this site or other sites, would obviously try to facilitate achieving some of those goals. Next slide, please. So in the Brighton official plan, the subject site is designated as a Greenland site. There is a portion of the frontage of the property, generally where the existing green or former greenhouse was, that's designated as a highway commercial designation. So as noted in the county official plan, it's within the urban area, but there's a process whereby my client will have to go through to bring the property into a residential land use designation. And as Josh had mentioned, that would trigger the requirement for the official plan amendment, as well as some of the other planning applications, which I'll bring up next. Next slide, please. Perfect. So the site, the existing site is designated as an agricultural zone. So as mentioned, not only is there an official plan amendment required, but to permit the residential use on the site, as well as any site-specific regulations for whatever development would occur on the property, a site-specific zoning amendment would be required. Next slide, please. So here I will outline a few different proposed development options. Okay, great. So I can't see. So Mike, is that okay if I, I'll open my so I can follow along. Yeah, I can't see it from there. Sorry, everyone. Okay. So the first option is a mix of townhouse units that are proposed within the on the site. So an entrance from the site you can see is at the bottom of the slide, which would be from Ontario Street on the southern edge of the property. And essentially what is proposed is a ring road system with a number of townhouse built form typologies that are proposed. There is future connectivity that is available through this option, both at the rear of the site through a potential future north-south road connection, as well as obviously connectivity on the southern edge of the site through a new proposed road connection that could integrate with the property to the south. As part of this concept, there are a number, as I mentioned, a number of different townhouse built forms that are proposed. So there are, for example, 20-foot wide townhomes that are proposed, which is unit type A, and that's primarily on the north edge of the site. The type B units, where are the type B units? Oh, on the south edge of the site. And then there's actually like a live work unit, which is over here on the right, which is a combination of opportunities for retail and residential uses. Next slide, please. So the next development option is a bit different than the last. You have a combination of a townhouse built form units, as well as a up to a 5-story apartment building that's fronting onto Ontario Street. When we originally met with the municipality, geez, I can't even think, quite a while ago now, over a year ago now, there was obviously comments we did receive and some community feedback regarding the need for apartment units in Brighton. So we conceptually are showing a 5-story building that fronts onto Ontario Street. As part of, general good planning practices and principles, you're seeing a lot of new developments where they try to integrate what's called like from an urban design perspective, like a street wall, where you bring the building up to the street to more animate, the Ontario Street frontage. And what we had shown in this option was an actual underground parking system to connect to and provide additional parking for the 5-story building. I will note that since this was originally designed, we have done some additional background work, and some of that includes our geotechnical and hydrogeological studies. And what we found is actually the groundwater on this site, and this impacts obviously the neighboring properties as well, is that the groundwater ranges, but it's roughly about 1 meter below grade. So I'll be candid, it would be very challenging to fit an underground parking structure in there. So any option that would consider apartment would have to look at some sort of likely at-grade parking structure. The challenge with that, to be again being candid, is that you don't want an above-grade parking structure that could look ugly and would not fit in from an urban design perspective. So that would have to be really articulated well if that were to occur. Just in terms of this option, so again, this was a 120 unit 5-story apartment building with a number of 3-story townhouse units that abut the site, with a ring road system, which would be a private condominium road, as well as a central parkland feature. Next slide, please. So the third option is a total of 94 townhouse units. This provided a connection to Ontario Street, albeit further to the north in this situation, with a central park feature. Again, this option provides a number of varying townhouse typologies, a ring road system, a road connection that is north and south, albeit not right at the rear of the property, but a little bit inset from the rear property line to allow for townhouse units at the back, which would face the existing open space, and then the ring road system, which would provide opportunities for connectivity both north and south, and then the ring road system specifically with opportunities for connectivity to that southern property. The typologies are, again, mostly residential in terms of the unit types, with the exception of Block C, again, fronting Ontario Street. That would be, again, a live-work typology. And you see at the rear of Block C, they've got, there's like a laneway that's proposed there, with ancillary visitor parking to accommodate the live-work units. Next slide. Okay, this is the last option. It's slightly modified from the previous one that was just shown. So this is a reduction of 6 units. So this is 88 units, whereas the previous one was 94 units. And it's just a varying typology that's proposed. So mainly these are wider townhouse units on some of the blocks, but a very similar overall layout with future connectivity, almost identical as what you previously saw. Next slide, please. So up on the screen, you can see one of the concept renderings, and this is the same rendering that you can see on the board to my left. So this is the 3-story rendering for townhouse units that is conceptually proposed. So what you're seeing here, just in terms of the built form, are typical peak roof design, 2 parking spaces for each unit. And then in terms of cladding, it's a stone, I'll call it skirt at the bottom. You've got brick materiality with other cladding above, just to soften the look. Next slide, please. And then this is a two-story option. So as I mentioned, some of the options provided for a bit wider townhouse units. Some of those wider units would be to allow for a wider frontage and greater floor space. So instead of having a 3-unit, more narrow townhouse unit, you'd have a bit wider for more square footage. And this would only be accommodated in 2 floors, but similar overall architectural materials and styles, as well as the peak roof designs. Next slide, please. So this is just a preliminary constraints map that we've obviously had some discussions and been working with the Conservation Authority to just define some of these limits. And this will tie into our future studies. We still have to undertake a full detailed environmental impact study, as well as all the other reports that would tie into that. So as part of that, you can see here, there's behind our property, there's a coastal wetland feature. And you can see here, there's a yellow line, and that yellow line is a 30-meter buffer from the limits of that wetland feature. So basically no development can happen within that coastal wetland feature or the buffer of that feature. And you can see that basically just touches the edge of the property and impacts obviously the lands to the rear. There are obviously, adjacent to the property, there is, trees and woodland features. And this is something as part of our environmental impact study that we have to assess. We have to provide those studies to the municipality, to the Conservation Authority, and work through any issues. So we still have to determine, for example, all the species of trees, what they look like, if there's any other features that need or should be protected as part of our project. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, and I believe Josh mentioned in his brief presentation, the proposed application would require an application to amend the official plan to bring the site in conformity with the province's policy documents, as well as the County of Northumberland official plan, being it's within an urban area, but specifically to provide for the future residential uses, as well as an application to amend the zoning bylaw. And then a future either plan of subdivision or site plan control application would be required either concurrently or subsequent to those both the official plan and zoning amendment applications. As I mentioned at the beginning, none of these applications have been submitted. We're still with the consulting team going through our design options, looking at stormwater impacts, looking at the environmental impacts. We still have to finalize a traffic study, and this will inform, in addition to all the comments we will hear from you tonight and the previous public meeting, this will inform our decision-making process and what this community might look like in the future. That's the end of my presentation, and looking forward to hear everyone's thoughts tonight. Thank you. I think at this time we're happy to hear from anyone that would like to come up to the podium, that would like to speak on behalf of the application. But just in terms of our team, I've got myself here this evening, and the project architect is here this evening as well. We'll be taking notes, and again, just look forward to hearing everyone's thoughts. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Okay.
I'll start things off with one quick question and then a longer comment question. In the first plan, in the fine print, there's a section that says snow storage. What is snow storage and why does it only occur in that plan and no others? Okay, I asked first about, oh, I got it really close. Snow storage in the first plan, what it is and why it only occurs in the first plan and none of the others.
Thank you for the question. So for anyone who didn't hear, the question was snow storage. It is articulated in a note on the first plan and not all the other plans. This is obviously still early conceptual stage. We haven't fully detailed all of the plans and put where all snow storage locations will be located. But in any community, there will have to be specific areas for snow storage. So, and the reason why for that is because obviously these roads are not they're not municipal roads. They are going to be private condominium roads, and we need to make sure that to the municipality standards as well, there's adequate spaces for snow storage. So they just haven't been provided on all the plans, to your question.
Gotcha. My more important question is concerning traffic study. Am I correct to assume that the traffic study has not yet been done for this, but will be done, or has there anything been done preliminarily?
So for anyone that didn't hear, the question was regarding a potential traffic study. So a traffic study is underway right now. We've done some of the background data collection, but it's not been finalized yet. And part of that is we won't finalize it until we hear feedback tonight, questions and comments, because what typically happens is once we finalize or get closer to finalizing a design option, we'll provide that to the traffic consultant to finalize their reports and numbers.
And you are including, I assume, the other development that's going in up the street and incorporating their traffic as well.
That's correct. So usually not only is the municipality asking for that as well in terms of including, future developments, both currently planned and also potential developments, but there's also a traffic forecast years out that has to be accommodated for in any traffic study.
Thank you.
If persons could just include their name, introduce themselves beforehand, and maybe Brenda, if you could pass that message to people in the back, because you have the benefit of the mic. I don't.
Mr. Walsh just asked everybody to identify themselves before they speak. Good evening. My name is Brenda Richardson and I live on Raglan Street. I'd like to thank the Planning Department for arranging this meeting. I have a few concerns regarding this development along with the other proposed developments south of the tracks. Approximately 5 years ago, Mr. Brian Keane came before council recommending opening up Raglan Street. At this time, Mr. Keane was the town's peer engineer as well as the engineer for Hamilton Woods subdivision. It's no secret that G.D. Jewell are the engineers hired by 4 subdivisions south of the tracks. I would like to know if Mr. Keane or anyone from G.D. Jewell is currently the town's peer engineer. Having an engineer review their own work has always been a thorn on my side, and this has been mentioned at previous council meetings. Can you answer that, or are you going to do it at another time? Or
Sure, I can answer it. No, so G.D. Jewell will not be involved as they did the traffic study for Brighton Meadows. So, I don't have a microphone, so I will try to be as loud as I can. No, G.D. Jewell will not be involved in the peer review as they were involved in the subdivision to the north. So it would be reviewed by a different engineering firm if there is a peer review involved.
okay. Since Raglan Street has opened up, the traffic has increased along with speed to unsafe conditions for pedestrians. Most of these heavy trucks drive well above the posted 40 miles per hour speed limit. The entrance to the park on Raglan Street is hidden and unmarked. There's no way that one of these trucks could stop in time if a child ran out on the road. A pedestrian was hit last summer on Ontario Street, and a dog was killed this summer on Raglan. Infrastructure is an issue with me. These developments are ruining our roads. A fully loaded cement truck weighs 66,000 pounds and weighs 27,000 pounds empty. A dump truck loaded with fill can weigh up to 37 tons. I personally don't feel that the developers are paying enough in fees towards infrastructure. Raglan Street had many cracks filled this past summer. As many as 30 trips a day can be seen a day with cement and dump trucks going back and forth on Raglan Street. Mr. Berry, you mentioned at the other virtual meeting that you were looking into a truck route. Do you have any idea have you had a chance to do that, or?
Sure, Brenda, I'm going to ask for the microphone from Paul.
Sure.
Second.
Yep. Do you want to wait?
Was it explained earlier? Oh, yeah, here's one, yeah. So yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, okay, thanks for the question. Yes, we will be looking at a haul route. So typically the haul route will come in with the complete application submission. So once the materials are received, we'll be asking the proponent to identify a construction management plan. And that would identify where the trucks and construction materials are going to be entering and exiting from. And of course, that drawing would be part of the public review process, so you'd have a chance to look at it as well. And we have taken your consideration in about Raglan as well, so that will be shared with the developer.
Yeah, because you know that there's still a portion of Raglan Street that's not assumed by the municipality as well.
I'm aware of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would also like to know what the grand total of houses that will be built on Ontario Street, including all 5 phases of Hamilton Woods and all the proposals before us now. So I know you wouldn't be able to answer that now, but I hope that you could give me a roundabout figure on that. If 214 Ontario Street gets approved along with the rest, it is like building another town with no doctors, no permanent emergency services, and schools are full. We have had flooding here. Can our treatment plant withstand another flood? Stormwater management has been a huge issue in Brighton, and that is the reason for the stormwater management plan, which we keep hearing is being followed. Well, I disagree, as development recommendations are not being implemented. For example, it was recommended interlocking brick in driveways so water can be absorbed into the ground and not into our system. A rain barrel program was strongly suggested, which the surrounding municipalities are already implementing. If this subdivision gets approved, it will take a few years to complete. Heavy trucks and equipment for this development, Hamilton Woods, Quick Subdivision, Grimes Property, Gosport, the work on Harbor Street, Wallace Street, Marina Street, and Prince Edward Street is going to cause major traffic issues and an unsafe environment for us living south of the tracks. Does Brighton need more housing? Yes, but we're not getting what Curtin Brighton residents want or need. Brighton is just fulfilling the housing need for the GTA. I ask you to sit back, look at these as a whole, and figure out the best, the safest way to move forward where residents are concerned, our infrastructure, and how and when Brighton needs to grow. Thank you.
Yes, for the record, David Green. Who's taller than Brenda? Maybe. A couple of questions as it relates to this development. What is the impact on our fire services trying to service a 5-story apartment building?
Thank you for the question. I don't have the
I
other
can
one.
hear your answer, but no one else can.
Okay, Josh, do you mind passing the other? That's okay. Can you hear me, everyone? So thank you for the question. So if a 5-story building or any apartment building is proposed, there will be requirements from a fire and building code perspective. So typically those kind of buildings are sprinklered, right? But I'll be candid that the details of that building have not been defined or fully resolved yet.
You mentioned that you're conducting a traffic study, and you led me to believe that traffic study was being conducted now. And how do you take into account the seasonal changes on Ontario Street when the provincial park is open?
So thank you for the question. So as part of any traffic study, usually they conduct the traffic modeling at certain times of the year. And they also factor in some of those, like I'll call it swings, obviously, in traffic volumes that naturally occur, right? It's a very popular destination, right? Down in Presqu'île. And so the traffic engineer would obviously base some of their data not only on the current volumes that they provide, but they would also typically look at what some of those fluctuations, anticipated fluctuations would be.
How could they possibly look at the traffic that we experience in the summer months when Ontario Street at some points has been stopped without actually experiencing it. This is not a studyable type item.
So that's a great question. I'll be candid. I'm not a traffic engineer. I'm not going to purport that I am, but it's something that like we'll have to obviously provide those details to the municipality. I'll make a note of it that we'll just bring up with our traffic engineer to address.
Continuing on with traffic, my understanding is there's one entrance and one exit, and that is on Ontario Street.
That's correct. So one of the intents is I guess I'll call it an interim basis, and assuming that our site is the first to develop on this side of Ontario, this would be the first access point, and there would be future connectivity options both to the north and to the south of our site for if those properties in theory were to develop in the future, new connection points could occur to the south of us, multiple connections on Ontario, and then potentially as well to the north on Raglan.
But all of the traffic would still pour onto Ontario Street.
Yes, that's correct.
One of the concerns is in regards to parking. It's not unusual for a development like this that attracts individuals who have multiple cars, and I did not see multiple parking opportunities.
So thank you for the question. So each, I'll maybe start with the townhouse unit. So each of the townhouse units are proposed to have 2 vehicle parking spaces, one in the garage, one in the driveway. And then there are excess visitor spaces in certain locations around each of the proposed ring roads for additional visitor parking. As part of our traffic study, this will have to be provided from a traffic engineer. They will give us additionally feedback and advice and justify any parking rate that we propose to make sure that it frankly functions and works. From my perspective, and I can speak on behalf of my client, I don't think they want to sell a project where there's going to be an issue in terms of a market perspective, right? Like as you mentioned, people have cars, they need to park them. It would be not appropriate to develop a site with inefficient parking.
Okay, but we've experienced that at other developments where we were promised adequate parking, including garage and driveway, and the garage can barely hold a golf cart, let alone a car. So I hear you. 2 last questions, please. Ontario Street, probably not a question for you. The infrastructure of Ontario Street is not the best. Do we have plans, Paul, to fix Ontario Street, for the lack of a better word, between the shoulders and no sidewalks and sidewalk on one side and the actual road is starting to give issues?
Yeah, I think looking at the secondary plan is going to have a long range direction looking statements, and the secondary plan will give some indication of what improvements are needed and where and when. I'd have to work with the director of infrastructure as well to coordinate any short, medium, and long-term capital works program.
Okay. And my last question, what is the timing on this? It's probably not next week. It's probably not next month. Are we talking 18 months, 24 months? What kind of development time do we look at for the proposals that Josh put up there?
Thank you for the question, David. So assuming that my client makes a decision to proceed with one of the options, I would anticipate a planning application would probably start sometime in the first half of next year, and that process would have to unfold. I don't want to obviously commit Paul and Josh to the municipal timelines or council, but it would have to go through a public process. It would have to get a future recommendation report and go through a subdivision process. So I would suggest it's probably still a couple of years out.
Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me? My name is Pam Pettigrew. I live on Huff Road. I have been on Huff Road for 50 years, And the traffic in the height of the summer going to Presqu'île is what people in town cannot even begin to imagine. Boats almost as wide as the road, motorhomes, trailers, everything. And it's just huge. So whatever roads are going to be impacted by the summer have to be looked at first, not later, because they'll be wrecked. I would like to know also, has there been a soil study done of this property?
Thank you for the question, Pam. So yes, we have done a preliminary or geotechnical and hydrogeological report. Those findings and the report is not finalized yet, but it's underway right now.
But that was a greenhouse. There are lots and lots of things that could be in that soil that would have to be remedied, removed, or assessed. And is that on the planning docket? Because that can be very important.
That's a great question, Pam. So in addition to the geotechnical and hydrogeological report, we also are required to submit a phase 1 and phase 2 report, which will look at the soil quality, which will look at if there is any potential contamination, and they do that through a study of various boreholes throughout the site.
My other question is, you talk about accessibility to the south eventually. Is that not marshland? Almost? Like that would require a conservation authority.
Yes. Smith, could you go up, or Josh, could you change the slide up a couple? Yeah. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. So as I mentioned, you can see the yellow line. That is the, I'll call it more of a marsh, potential marsh feature, being
Yeah.
the buffer of the coastal wetland feature, which is predominantly to the west of the site. There is some potential, I'll call tableland and developable lands, which are associated with the property directly to the south. But all that has to be studied, and
Yeah.
I can't comment until that owner does like a detailed environmental impact study, because I don't know if there are any other features. I'm not aware.
Well, all that land is very close to low land, which is what we call it down there. And it will hold an amazing amount of water. And unless it's well addressed beforehand, it'll be a mucky mess later. Thank you.
David Green, are the houses basement or slab on grade? The
Thank you,
townhomes.
Yeah, thank you, David, for the question. I don't think that's been designed yet. I think we still need to go through more of the detailed design to figure that out. I know in working with our architect in the past, and depending on the site constraints, we have looked at slab on grade options. We have looked at basement options, but it will depend on, what the finished grade of the site eventually would be.
And my only reason for asking is you said earlier that the garages would become one of the parking spaces, but if it's slab on grade, my experience would indicate that the garage now becomes storage, and now you have 2 cars that have to be parked outside. Polishing the microphone again. No, that's right. No, sorry, get up 4 more times.
Good evening, Paul Moran from Brighton. Is given what you said about the apartment building option and the groundwater, so is that option essentially off the table then?
Thank you for the question. It's not necessarily off the table. If it depends on the feedback we get obviously tonight about, the various options, which, I'm happy to hear comments on. But if it were to occur and some sort of, town apartment option were to be designed, it would have to be an at grade, like an at grade parking structure. But again, it's like, how do you do that and still build a nice looking building, right? We don't want just a sea of parking, at grade. And typically you can do that through a number of ways, including screening or, design features in the building.
But is there sufficient space for that at grade park on the property?
There could be, but it would likely be a reduction of the total density in units, right? Again, it's like it's a balance of market perspective, right? You can't build units that don't have parking, right?
So is this development deemed to be medium density or high density?
I mean, from my perspective, working on a number of various development applications, I would consider this, it's still overall like a low-rise built form. Like typically like medium density or like a mid-rise built form is 5 stories and greater. So I would consider this still a low-rise built form.
Okay. Is the development geared towards families or couples for the majority?
That's a great question. I think from my perspective and speaking to my client, it's likely for families is what they're targeting. In saying that, if there were the apartment option, it would potentially, be geared toward a different demographic. Yeah.
Right. So the townhouse units ranging from like 2, 3, maybe even 4 bedroom.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
In these types of developments, and that the roads are privately managed roads, how does the development deal with busing of children, given the density of the housing that's there and the limited access to Ontario Street?
That's it. So that's a great question. So even in all the concept options, the condominium roads, although they are, albeit slightly more narrow than a typical municipal road, they still have to accommodate for minimum turn requirements for fire trucks, for garbage trucks, for potential busing, right? Busing routes have not been, we haven't looked at that in detail yet, as well as locations for any potential bus stops, albeit in front of the site or what have you.
This is more for the municipality. Is Ontario Street, I mean, my concern is safety of children, primarily on Ontario Street. Is Ontario Street able to be widened to have a center turn lane? Given that the increased flow of traffic and the limited access into this development will have a major impact on accessibility in and out.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'd have to take a look at the actual right-of-way width. Ontario Street was always, I believe, designed to be what we call a collector road, as opposed to a local road. It's meant to handle a higher volume of traffic. And looking at the right-of-way width on different parts of Ontario Street, there has been widening in the past. As you might notice, that one type of a service road for that certain row of houses coming down the west side there, that was a widening to an attempt to minimize the number of entrances and things like that, so that there could be higher volume, higher traffic flows. So I'll have to revisit that width and see if there is room for a turning lane. But that's a very good question. And the traffic impact study, I think, will probably be able to address that.
Yeah,
because it is a question that normally is always needing to be addressed in the traffic impact study.
Does the few other questions just about the traffic impact study, does it take into consideration, like I understand there's 2 parking spaces, the garage, the driveway, but everybody that lives there will have people coming to see them. And in my experience living in other communities where these types of developments are, it results in a lot of on-street traffic and people kind of abusing the space and making it more difficult for cars to get in and out, because people, especially after COVID, will want to get together. How is that dealt with, both in terms of within the development, and then what is the city's responsibility to provide some other place to park if there's people that want to park and there's not sufficient space within the development?
That's a great question, Paul. So in every community I work on, we typically look at the parking rates and we try to accommodate for adequate, generally speaking, supply for visitor parking. Sorry about that. So in any development I've worked on, we typically try to look at not only from market perspective, but also a parking demand perspective that, we get input from our traffic engineer on to look at what is an adequate supply. Albeit, as to your point, there's some events, that happen on an annualized basis that, it becomes an issue, right? Like I've worked on, for example, a number of retirement home projects, and I promise you, you can never plan for Mother's Day, right?
Mhm.
It's always an issue.
Right. So currently there are no services for people south of really Main Street. I'm thinking in terms of convenience stores, hair care, services that consumers want to take advantage of. So what this means is that this development is basically reliant on vehicles or people walking, riding their bikes to get to those types of services. So I guess my question is I realize on the east side of Ontario Street, there's the sidewalk, but there are no sidewalks really on the west side of Ontario Street. There's no crosswalks where, this is all going to be an issue as this development comes to fruition. And I think it's important that the traffic study and the community of Brighton is prepared to address these issues before something happens and someone is either killed or injured as a result of that. But it also means that there's a lot more vehicle traffic getting up to Brighton Main Street over to the grocery store and so on. Is the, city plan at all to develop other means of transportation, either through bike lanes, trails, so that people can get around without having to use their car?
So currently, municipality of Brighton does have a trails committee struck, and we are looking at trails options throughout the municipality that can be constructed over the long term. And there's also, and that will help inform our secondary plan. So a desirable outcome from that planning process will be to show areas that are multi-use pathways as opposed to simply sidewalks, as you see on the east side of Ontario Street there. So something similar to that, something that is about 3 meters wide, so a double the sidewalk width, and allows for bikes and pedestrian to be somewhat separated and have that added safety factor. So some of those things will be built in, and staff are cognizant of the fact that we don't have that on the west side of Ontario.
Mm-hmm. So to address that, is that something that would be timed to go with this development coming on stream?
It's not uncommon for a condition of approval that there be sidewalks installed along the frontage of a property.
Okay. So last question, in the one option where you have the live work condos, so the work portion of that, what is it geared to in terms of the design and the cost to be able to rent that space for a business owner? And when the intended uses that you would expect with that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So like typically, it's not like a high density retail use. Usually they're ancillary service uses. So I usually envision like office uses. You could have like a dentist or a dental hygienist. You could have a hairdresser. You could have like a small doctor's practitioner's office. Those types of uses, and they're usually facilitated through like an at grade unit. And usually you try to do that, meeting general, call it code standards from like accessibility perspective for customers and the public.
So is there parking specifically for consumers other than the people that live in that community, put into that particular plan?
That's a great question. So as part of that, like what I've done in previous development projects I've worked on, and what's kind of shown here is at the rear of the live work units, so not fronting Ontario Street, but at behind them, you have ancillary visitor parking spaces. And usually it's from a traffic demand perspective. Again, we have to determine this through a full traffic report. But what happens is During the daytime, as you can imagine, when the businesses are in operation, that's when you have visitors in those spaces. And the evening, you know, when people are back home from work, right, they may use those visitor spaces, right, and it kind of offsets, right.
The challenge with that though is that if it's a business location, the in and out traffic is a lot more frequent than it is with just the residential usage, because people are coming in and out using those services.
Yeah.
So I really don't know how you can do Ontario Street without some kind of lights to be able to deal with that volume of traffic and, you know, not having to deal with some kind of incident with accidents and such.
I made a note of it. We'll look at that in our traffic report.
Thank you.
Not that I'm going to reach any of these. Good to get started. Yeah, that's great. My name is Cheryl Longevin. I live on 6 Cove Crescent. Behind me is a Harbor Point water management system, and it was enlarged 2 years ago to accept drainage from the Hamilton Woods development area, of which there's 5 phases. Our Hilton Homes development was where we first applied for. Now, my concern is here, where is there a water management area to collect this water? Because as we know, we were told, water goes from north to south. So there's a lot more water coming through there, and we do have that marshy area. So where is their detention pond, so to speak, so that all this water is not draining onto Ontario Street or flooding that marshland?
Thank you for the question, Cheryl. So as part of our future detailed studies, we do have to provide our full civil package, including grading, drainage plans, and a stormwater management report and brief. As part of that stormwater report, we will have to look at that, what that all looks like. But for the most part, especially in the townhouse options, it is anticipated that a lot of the stormwater management is intended, similar to like most detached homes, to be treated on site, right? Either in rear yards and front yards. And we have to look at if there is warranted or if any potential need for stormwater management pond or other stormwater management services in, for example, the right of way.
So where would that be built if you had to build a pond? There, to accept all that water, because there's going to be more construction opposite Raglan as well.
So because this is a private condominium road, I've found in other projects I've worked on, what we've done is actually, in addition, if it's warranted, in addition to the on-site stormwater management controls, sometimes we might actually put it within the private roadway, right? There's different stormwater management systems to actually, deal with rainwater and treat it.
So is that, you're telling me then if it's underground, it's going to go into the cities or Brighton's storm sewers?
I can't recall if there are storm sewers in this location. Yeah. So just, sorry, Paul was just mentioning, like, there's no storm sewers there today, and there would be no discharge into a municipal storm sewer. So as part of any stormwater management report, whether, especially on a site like this, there would be a requirement from the municipality on every project I've worked on to treat it on site. And you can't have any negative impacts to adjacent properties or to the municipal infrastructure, right? So we would have to look at that as part of our detailed reports to make sure that that did not occur.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just sorry, Paul was just mentioning as well. So if in theory there was a stormwater system that we could connect to, even at that case, we would have to look at our stormwater management that we are creating on our site, and it would have to basically discharge at like a 1-to-1 ratio, right? Like, so we can't like discharge more.
No.
Yeah, so that's we would have, if in theory that were the case, we'd have to look at that.
Okay, thank you.
Doug Valls, 183 Ontario Street. Does the development have any plans for household level 2 EV charging?
The question was, do any of the households have planned for level 2 EV charging? So in a number of projects I'm working on, you know, it's not in the building code, but they are trying to look at implementation for, you know, future connectivity for EV cars and electric charging stations. In some projects, you know, we've implemented that in, like, for example, a townhouse development. It might be a connection inside the garage unit, or if I've done apartment buildings and there's an underground parking structure, you might have a certain percentage of those spaces that might have potential for the EV charging stations. I'll be candid, we're not at that detailed stage yet, but we can absolutely look at that. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, you're getting ready to do something else. Alex Romard. I have a question. On some of the drawings, what shows an amenity area that looks like a park. Is the park considered just for the residents of that subdivision, or is it open to anyone else?
So the park, in theory, it obviously functions and is designed in, for the most part, like we try to design it in a general central location. So it's safe. We can have it like well lit, right? And it is designed as when would be part of that future condominium corporation, unless the municipality were in theory to ask my client to, you know, provide that land to, as, you know, a public park space. But in general, it's not like it's not like it's a gated community. It's generally open. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Hi, Pam Pettigrew. I'm just wondering how many other subdivisions are planned for Ontario Street, and what are the numbers involved?
That on, yes. Thank you, Pam. So we have the one before us, and then we have the Brighton Meadows that was just draft approved not too long ago on the north side of Raglan, also on the west side of Ontario Street. And it
How
has
many units is going to be in each one?
in the thank you. So how many units in the Brighton Meadows, Josh? That was 172. And that's the only two developments that immediately come to mind directly onto Ontario Street. Yeah, that's its own. Yeah, I guess Hamilton Woods would, it has some existing access other places too, but it would empty out onto Ontario Street. And there are some pre-consultations on lands in that same vicinity, but very, very early conceptual stages. So sometime in the new year, I think we'll be having something like this for another one.
So there's 4 or 5 more areas being built off of Ontario Street?
What I've described would be 1, 2, 3.
3.
That's correct.
And are any of them going to be on town water?
They will all be on town water, yes.
They'll be on town water, but what about the runoff? Will it be
All on town water, all on sanitary, and as Mr. Demzak was describing, the Ministry of Environment guidelines require all developments to maintain its own stormwater, such that as they cover up the ground with buildings and roads, that there is an increased rate of stormwater discharge off the property. The phrase in the ministry manual is that pre-development conditions equal post-development conditions.
Good luck with that. It's not my experience, but good luck.
and Vowels, Ontario Street. With all of these developments like the Meadowwoods one and this one, is there any plans for having fire and emergency services located south of the tracks?
A good question. We do hear that from time to time. So in the budget, the capital budget for the municipality, there has been a fire master plan approved. So there will be a study being done in 2022.
A study being done, okay. Where potentially could it be located?
There are a number of sites and options and alternatives being reviewed by the fire chief and the CAO.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Not all sites are on Ontario Street.
Okay, so I think we're gonna move on to concluding remarks. Yeah. So I'll turn it over to Paul Demzak.
Thanks, Paul. So I just wanted to thank everyone this evening for coming out tonight. From my perspective, you know, this is the second public meeting. The first one was done obviously virtually. I've been taking notes this meeting. Our project architect, I can see scribbling away feverishly, as well as I see the city taking notes. So like we'll be taking these comments from our perspective. The next steps on our end would be to review all the comments we've received tonight, the comments we received from the virtual meeting, as well as input from our consulting team on a number of the studies that we spoke about this evening, and make a decision at least to submit a future development application. Likely one of the concept options you see this evening or some sort of combination thereof. And that would be submitted to the municipality. And as Paul mentioned, there would be a future statutory public meeting. So even after we submit, there's no decisions that are made, and we look forward to any other additional feedback that you all might have. Thank you.